morning sun poured a soft gold over the marble steps of Providence Municipal Court. The air was calm, too calm, as though the city itself was holding its breath. Then from the distance came the low purr of an expensive engine. A black luxury car glided through the street, its chrome edges gleaming under the light. Every head turned. The courthouse security guard straightened up, sensing the arrival of someone who carried more power than respect. The car stopped with slow confidence. The door opened and out stepped her, Isabella Crane, the daughter of Senator Thomas Crane, a man whose influence stretched from city council chambers to state dinners. Her designer heels clicked against the pavement like a countdown. She adjusted her sunglasses, not because of the sun, but because they acted as a shield, a wall between her and the world she thought was beneath her. She didn't look nervous. She didn't even look curious. Instead, her lips curved into a faint smirk, the kind of smile that doesn't need words to say, "I'm untouchable." Her phone buzzed in her hand. She barely glanced at it, just rolled her eyes and whispered, "This won't take long." A few reporters stood near the courthouse entrance. One of them called out, "Miss Crane, any comments before your hearing?" She turned her head slightly, smiled like a celebrity posing on the red carpet, and replied coldly, "I'll be out before you can write your little article." Her confidence wasn't bravery. It was entitlement. And the arrogance was almost tangible. Inside the courthouse, the air changed. The humble atmosphere of justice, where ordinary people sought fairness, was pierced by her perfume, her presence, and her assumption that this was all a formality. She strutted down the hall like it was her runway, not a place of accountability. Court staff exchanged quiet looks. Everyone knew who her father was. Everyone knew how powerful the Cranes could be. As she entered the courtroom, the camera would slowly pan across the room, over wooden benches, quiet observers, and finally to the bench where Judge Caprio sat, adjusting his glasses and reviewing a stack of papers. His calm presence carried authority without intimidation, warmth without weakness. He didn't know her personally, but he'd seen hundreds like her, people who confused privilege for power, status for superiority. The bailiff announced her name. Case of Isabella Crane, charged with reckless driving and property damage. Her heels clicked as she approached the defendant's stand. She placed her purse on the table like she was checking into a hotel. A whisper escaped her lips, a quiet chuckle, as if this whole process amused her. When power meets humility, something unforgettable happens. The camera would then slowly tilt up to her face, perfectly composed, expression cool, but her eyes glinting with defiance. The smirk returned when she saw Judge Caprio's modest demeanor. To her, he was just another small-town judge. Nothing her father's name couldn't fix. Judge Caprio greeted her politely. "Good morning, Miss Crane." She nodded slightly, not even meeting his eyes. "Do you understand the charges against you?" he continued. "I do," she replied casually, brushing imaginary dust from her sleeve. "Though I think this is a bit exaggerated." The courtroom murmured quietly. Her tone wasn't defensive. It was dismissive. She truly believed this was a waste of her time. Judge Caprio raised his brows but said nothing. His silence was calm, but inside, his mind registered every word, every gesture. He had seen humility in the poor and arrogance in the privileged. And he always let people reveal who they really were before passing judgment. The prosecutor began outlining the case, speeding through a residential zone, striking a fence belonging to a local community center, and driving off without stopping. The details didn't faze her. She laughed softly as if the story was being told about someone else. When a photo of the damaged fence was shown, she leaned back, sighed, and muttered under her breath, "It's just a fence." The microphone picked it up. The entire courtroom froze. Even the air seemed to stop moving. Judge Caprio's eyes lifted slowly from the document in front of him. His gaze wasn't harsh, but it was deep, steady, piercing, like he could see past the expensive clothes and the name that followed her. In that single moment, her arrogance echoed louder than any gavel. The smirk still lingering on her face, the courtroom holding its breath, and Judge Caprio quietly studying her, knowing this day would become one she'd never forget. Because in this courtroom, titles meant nothing. and the next few minutes would remind her what justice truly looked like. The air inside the courtroom was tense, not from noise, but from what wasn't being said. The faint hum of the ceiling fans mixed with the sound of papers rustling, like whispers of truth waiting to be heard. All eyes were on Isabella Crane. She leaned back in her chair, legs crossed, arms folded. The smirk was still there, confident, unbothered, almost daring the courtroom to challenge her. Judge Caprio sat quietly, pen in hand, reviewing her case file as if time itself had slowed. He didn't rush. He didn't need to. Arrogance, where the narrator's voice began softly, often mistakes patience for weakness. But in this courtroom, patience is power. Judge Caprio finally looked up. His calm tone filled the room. Miss Crane, I see here that this isn't your first traffic violation. Her lips twitched, forming a half smile. It's not as dramatic as it sounds, Your Honor. Just a few misunderstandings. Misunderstandings? He repeated, his voice still gentle. Yes, she said, shrugging. People overreact. It's just a fence. No one was hurt. Her words dropped like cold stones. Gasps fluttered through the courtroom. The elderly woman whose community center had been damaged sat quietly in the back row, her hands clasped tightly. Judge Caprio noticed. He leaned forward slightly. Miss Crane, do you realize that the fence you damaged belonged to a youth program for underprivileged children? Isabella tilted her head, unamused. I'll pay for it. Isn't that what matters? The narrator's tone deepened. To her, money was the solution. But to him, justice was about something far greater. Judge Caprio's voice remained calm, but it carried weight now, the kind that couldn't be ignored. Tell me, Miss Crane, do you believe the law applies differently to people like you? The question sliced through her arrogance like a blade of truth. The courtroom fell utterly silent. Her eyes flicked up just briefly, locking with his. I believe, she said slowly, that sometimes people make too much out of small mistakes, especially when they know who my father is. The room stirred. Her words were soaked in privilege, dripping with entitlement. Even the bailiff shifted uneasily. But Judge Caprio didn't scold her. He simply nodded, almost empathetically. I see. And your father's position, do you think it gives you special protection? She hesitated, sensing a trap, but too proud to admit it. I don't need protection, Your Honor. I just know how these things work. And there it was, the illusion of power, spoken aloud. A belief that money and name could bend truth. Judge Caprio leaned back in his chair, folded his hands and sighed softly. The pause stretched long enough to make her uncomfortable. Then he spoke. You know, Miss Crane, when I first started serving as a judge, I met people who came here terrified. Single mothers, veterans, young men trying to rebuild their lives. They didn't have power or influence or names that carried weight, but they had humility. And that humility, he said, pointing gently toward his chest, is what earns respect in this courtroom. Her smirk began to fade, slightly. For the first time, her confidence wavered. She wasn't used to this, to someone speaking to her not with fear, but with moral authority. He continued, his tone steady but firm. Justice doesn't care about last names. Justice doesn't take bribes. Justice doesn't bow to privilege. It listens and it teaches. The camera, in cinematic fashion, would slowly zoom in on Isabella's face, her composure cracking, her arrogance thinning as his words sank deeper than she expected. Now, Judge Caprio said, I'd like you to turn around and look at the woman sitting behind you. She hesitated, then glanced back. The elderly woman, small, frail, but strong in spirit, sat there silently, her eyes filled not with anger, but with quiet disappointment. That woman, Judge Caprio continued, has spent 30 years helping children in this city, children who have nothing. And when you damaged her property, you didn't just break a fence. You broke something those kids built with their own hands. The courtroom grew still. Even the air felt heavy with truth. Isabella blinked, her jaw tightening. For a moment, the mask of arrogance slipped, revealing something raw, guilt, maybe even shame, though she tried to hide it behind a forced smile. I, I didn't know, she whispered. Judge Caprio nodded. That's the problem. You didn't care to know. The narrator's voice returned, deep and resonant. And for the first time, the politician's daughter, so used to bending the world to her will, was finally being bent by truth. Judge Caprio set down his pen. This court isn't here to humiliate you, Miss Crane. It's here to teach you what your father's influence could never buy. Respect for others. As he spoke, the camera would pan slowly across the courtroom. Faces of ordinary people watching, nodding silently. The justice they saw wasn't harsh or vengeful. It was human. And as Isabella's smirk faded completely, the weight of her father's name no longer shielded her. She was just another person, facing the truth. The narrator closed the chapter with quiet gravity. In that courtroom, power met humility and lost. The courtroom hung in silence. You could almost hear the sound of Isabella's confidence breaking. The same woman who had strutted into the courthouse moments earlier, head high and smirk unshakable, now sat frozen. Her fingers fidgeted with the sleeve of her designer jacket. Her gaze, once cold and defiant, dropped toward the polished wooden floor. Judge Caprio didn't rush. He knew when to speak, and more importantly, when to let silence do the talking. The pause stretched like a mirror, forcing Isabella to see herself through the reflection of her own actions. The narrator's voice entered, calm but heavy with meaning. Respect isn't something you're born with. It's something you learn, often the hard way. Judge Caprio leaned forward slightly, his tone soft but firm. Miss Crane, I've been sitting in this seat for many years. I've seen anger, arrogance, and even cruelty. But I've also seen redemption. People who walked in here blind to what they'd done and walked out seeing the world differently. He glanced down at her case file again, then up at the young woman whose face had begun to show the faintest trace of remorse. I believe, he continued, you can be one of those people. The audience in the courtroom exchanged subtle looks. Even the clerk, who'd been typing quietly, stopped for a moment to listen. But Isabella couldn't quite find her words. Her lips parted, but no sound came out. She'd never been spoken to this way before, not with authority and compassion in the same breath. Sometimes the most powerful verdict isn't about guilt, it's about growth. Judge Caprio picked up a small notepad beside him and began writing something slowly, deliberately. The scratching sound of the pen echoed faintly through the courtroom. Then he looked up again. Miss Crane, he said, you said earlier that no one was hurt by your actions. But that isn't true. When you damage what others have built with love and effort, you hurt more than property. You hurt dignity. She swallowed hard. He continued, his voice growing gentler. I'm not going to fine you today. Money doesn't teach lessons to people who already have plenty of it. Instead, I'm going to sentence you to something far more valuable. Time, a murmur moved through the room. Isabella looked up, confused. Time? She asked softly. Yes, Judge Caprio said, nodding. You'll spend the next 3 weekends volunteering at the community center you damaged. You'll work with the same children whose fence you destroyed. You'll see what they build, not with money but with heart. Her eyes widened, and for a moment, pride fought its last battle inside her. Community service? She muttered almost to herself. Yes, he replied, and while you're there, I want you to listen. To their stories, to their struggles, to their dreams. Because the greatest kind of respect is born when you stop talking and start listening. It wasn't punishment, it was perspective. A lesson money could never buy. For a long moment, Isabella didn't respond. The courtroom watched, waiting for her reaction. And then, something subtle, something rare, her face softened. I understand, Your Honor, she said finally. Her voice wasn't sharp anymore. It trembled slightly, honest and unguarded. I didn't mean to be disrespectful. I just thought things would be different because of who I am. Judge Caprio nodded, a faint smile forming on his face. You're right. Things are different now because of who you can become. A hush fell over the room. The words hit deeper than any fine or penalty could. The narrator continued. In that moment, the courtroom changed. It was no longer about the law. It was about humanity. The judge leaned back, resting his hands on the bench. Miss Crane, I believe people can grow when they're given a chance. Don't waste this one. For the first time since she'd entered, Isabella nodded respectfully. Thank you, Your Honor. And as she stood to leave, she did something no one expected. She turned toward the elderly woman sitting quietly in the back, the one whose fence she had damaged, and walked over. The entire courtroom held its breath. Isabella stopped in front of her, lowered her head, and said softly, I'm sorry. The old woman smiled, touched by the sincerity. Just do something good for those kids, she replied. Tears welled up in Isabella's eyes. Real, unfiltered emotion. Not embarrassment, not shame. Change. Judge Caprio watched silently, a glimmer of warmth in his eyes. Sometimes justice doesn't roar, it whispers. Sometimes the verdict that changes a life isn't written in law books but in hearts. The gavel came down softly. Case dismissed, Judge Caprio said. The courtroom didn't erupt in applause. It didn't need to. The silence said it all. A silence filled with respect. As Isabella walked out of the courtroom, the camera followed her. Slow motion, cinematic light streaming through tall courthouse windows, dust particles floating like tiny blessings in the air. Her expression was different now. No sunglasses, no smirk, just a quiet humility that seemed to light her from within. In the end, the narrator concluded, Judge Caprio didn't just teach her a lesson about the law, he taught her what it truly means to respect life. The next few weeks would change Isabella Crane's life in ways no courtroom ever could. The camera fades in from black, the grand courthouse replaced by a humble, sunlit community center on the city's edge. Children laugh in the distance. The sound of bouncing basketballs and paintbrushes scraping against old fences fills the air. It's peaceful, almost healing. The narrator's voice sets the tone, soft, reflective, and sincere. Some lessons aren't learned through punishment, they're lived through humility. Isabella arrives quietly. No expensive car, no sunglasses, no entourage. Her designer coat is gone, replaced by a simple gray hoodie and jeans. For the first time, she looks real. The same girl who once strutted into Judge Caprio's courtroom now hesitates before walking through the doors of a place she once mocked. The camera pans slowly across the room. Children painting murals, volunteers handing out snacks, walls covered with colorful drawings of hope and unity. Isabella stands at the entrance, unsure where to begin. An older volunteer, kind-eyed and gentle, approaches her. You must be the new helper, he says warmly. We could use an extra hand. She nods quietly. No arrogance, no attitude, just silence. The first few hours are awkward. She struggles with simple tasks, washing paint trays, picking up litter, listening to children's stories. Every smile she receives feels foreign to her, but gradually something begins to shift. The narrator continues. For years, Isabella thought power was about control, but here, surrounded by laughter and kindness, she began to understand. Real power is compassion. A young girl, no older than 10, tugs at Isabella's sleeve. Miss, can you help me paint the sun? She asks, holding up a dripping brush. Isabella smiles faintly, kneeling beside her. Of course! Together they fill the wall with bright yellows and soft oranges, a sunrise coming to life under their hands. The girl laughs when some paint splatters onto Isabella's cheek. For the first time in a long time, Isabella laughs too, genuinely. As the hours pass, her posture relaxes, her eyes soften. She's no longer the politician's daughter, she's just a person, one among many, learning what it means to serve. The camera captures her wiping sweat from her forehead, helping carry boxes of donated food, and reading stories to the children sitting around her in a circle. The lighting is warm and golden, highlighting her transformation. Humility replacing pride, joy replacing judgment. Then one afternoon, as she's leaving, the same elderly woman from the courtroom, the one whose fence she destroyed, walks in. Isabella freezes, guilt flashing across her face. The woman smiles softly. They told me you've been helping here, she says. I just wanted to see it for myself. Isabella looks down, embarrassed. I still owe you an apology, she says quietly. The woman shakes her head gently. You already gave it. Now you're living it. That's what matters. The narrator's voice deepens with emotion. Forgiveness isn't about forgetting what someone did. It's about believing they can be better than what they were. A tear slips down Isabella's cheek. The woman reaches out, taking her hand. Keep doing good, dear, she whispers. That's how you make peace with the past. The camera pulls back slowly, showing Isabella standing among the children again, smiling, laughing, painting, alive in a way she never was before. Days turn into weeks, and her community service ends. But Isabella doesn't stop coming. She returns, not because she has to, but because she wants to. What began as punishment, the narrator concludes softly, became purpose. The girl who once disrespected justice now carried it in her heart. The final shot fades to slow motion. Isabella walking out of the community center at sunset. She pauses, looking up at the sky with a faint smile, the last rays of light brushing across her face. It's not the face of arrogance anymore. It's the face of someone reborn through grace. The courthouse stood quiet that morning, sunlight filtering gently through the stained glass windows, casting warm patterns across the empty benches. The air carried a sense of calm, the kind that follows storms long weathered. Judge Frank Caprio sat alone at his bench, reviewing papers he'd already read a dozen times. But his mind wasn't on the docket. It was on her, Isabella Crane, the young woman whose arrogance had once filled this room, and whose humility had now restored his faith in redemption. The camera frames him in a soft sidelight, his expression calm, thoughtful. The faint hum of the city drifts in through the window. Justice, he murmurs quietly to himself, isn't about breaking someone down. It's about giving them a chance to stand taller. He leans back in his chair, eyes wandering to a small photograph on his desk, a picture of his late father. A man who taught him that mercy can change a heart faster than punishment ever could. The same principle he'd carried through every case, every verdict, every difficult choice. The narrator's voice takes over, deep and reverent. In a world that often confuses strength with cruelty, Judge Caprio built his court on something stronger: compassion. A knock at the chamber door breaks his thoughts. His clerk steps in, smiling. Judge, you might want to see this. She hands him a small envelope. Inside is a handwritten letter. Delicate handwriting, a faint scent of paint and paper. It's from Isabella. The judge unfolds it carefully. Her words are simple yet powerful. Your Honor, I came to court thinking the law was just about punishment. But you showed me it's about people. I've been volunteering at the community center ever since. And for the first time, I understand what responsibility truly means. Thank you for seeing someone worth saving. He sits in silence for a moment, the weight of the words settling in. His eyes glisten with quiet emotion. The camera zooms in slowly, the faintest tear gathering at the corner of his eye before he exhales deeply, a small, proud smile forming. In that moment, the courtroom wasn't just a place of law, it was a place of grace. And the man who sat behind the bench realized that even the smallest act of mercy can echo far beyond those four walls. Judge Caprio folds the letter gently and places it beside the photo of his father. The sunlight catches the edges of the paper, a symbol of hope glowing faintly against the wood. He whispers, almost to himself, if my father could see this, he'd be proud. The camera pans upward, rising from the bench toward the grand seal of justice behind him. The music swells, emotional, orchestral, uplifting. Because in the end, the narrator says, voice steady and heartfelt, true justice isn't just about the law, it's about the heart that enforces it. The scene fades to black with a final line appearing on screen. Compassion is the highest form of justice.